ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Delphi and our panel, Charting a Course to a Sustainable and Efficient Industry. My name is Désποινα Παναγιώτου Θεοδοσίου, and I'm the co-CEO of Tototheo Maritime. I will be the moderator for this panel. We are living in an exciting era of international shipping, and today we will be discussing some of the most pressing issues facing our industry. Historically, shipping has been slow to change, or at least it had a reputation of being slow to change. But with the advent of regulations and the need for environmental safety, we are seeing changes in fuel efficiencies, technologies, and the reduction of the global greenhouse gas footprint of the industry. Our panel today will also focus on the emerging tools of automation and digitalization and how they can improve safety and efficiencies in shipping. I am thrilled to be joined today by Φίλιππος, Φιλής, President of EXA and President and CEO of Lemissoler, Δημήτριος Fafallios, Secretary of the Union of Greek Shipowners, Chairman of Intercargo and President of Fafallios Shipping, and Jan Dieleman, Chairman of the Global Maritime Forum and President of Cargill Ocean Transportation. I look forward to having a stimulating and productive conversation with you, so we'll just start immediately. Jan, I'll start with you. Cargill is one of the world's largest commodity trading companies, and as such, is a huge employer of tonnage. As a company, you have set a target to reduce your Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions by 30% per ton of product by 2030 over the company's 2017 baseline. My question is, how are your efforts going? Particularly, of course, with ocean transportation. What has worked well, what hasn't, and what do you see as being challenges?
Well, thanks, first of all, for inviting me here, and it's great to be here. Yes, we've been on this journey now for 5 years, I would say. So we started reporting our emissions in 2017, and it's been a journey, and we learned a lot. And I always say it's about the numbers, but it's also not about the numbers. And I think on the previous panel, we talked about diversity, and there's some links, I think, into that sense. I think some of the things on the numbers, you can go and look them up because we publish them. So there's full transparency there. We're about 7 grams on the EEOI, a little bit higher for our own internal business because of the nature of the business. But I think going back, I think what we learned along this journey is probably a lot more interesting. And I think there is 2 things in the whole emissions part. There is emissions that you can control, and there's emissions that, unfortunately, at the moment, you cannot control. And when I talk about not controlling, it means changing trade flows. It might mean market dynamics. It might mean weather events. It might be all kinds of geopolitical issues that can happen. So we've really learned to start really focusing on the things that we can actually control. And from the things that you can actually control, if you really want to take a couple of steps back, it's only 2 things you can actually do. And the one is really focusing on efficiencies. And the other one is really getting into the lower or zero carbon fuels. So when you look at the efficiencies, and I think this is very interesting, is there's the efficiencies around the asset. And when you talk to shipping people, very often the conversation gets focused on that. And you're talking about using digital tools, like we do in the Zero North. You're talking about different paints. You're talking about all kinds of energy-saving devices that you can do. You can take a modern fleet, and we all know that. And to be honest, there's no reason to not double down on that because every single one of them, including wind, which is a little bit more complex, has a payback. So there is an economic incentive actually aligned with the environmental component. So I think that is one thing. What I find more interesting is there is also things that you can do, but that's more around the supply chain that shipping actually serves. And then it becomes a bit more complicated because then you really start having to change the willingness to change of certain things. So if you want to scale up, you want to do parceling, you want to do virtual arrival notices, that becomes a little bit more complicated. And I think in the journey we started to see now, because we're able to show people what their emissions are, that people start really looking at these kind of things. The last thing, and you've probably seen that we've been dabbling a little bit into the zero carbon fuels, is we all know that in the end of the day, if we want to get to these targets, we'll have to shift at least some part of our portfolio to lower and or zero carbon fuels. So we've done 30,000 tons of biofuels, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. We started looking also at methanol, which is a little bit further down the road. The problem you're having there is the willingness to pay and the ability to pay, because there is no efficiency anymore. There's an extra cost that someone needs to bear. We're starting to find a couple of niches in the bulk sector where we are finding segments that are able to pay. But the reality is they're very, very small today, and we really need the regulator, and we're going to talk about that, I think, later as well, to also step into that area, because otherwise we're just not going to get to our targets.
Thank you so much, Jan. Other questions spring to mind listening to you, but I'll come to them later. For example, we had a brief discussion earlier outside the room, and we talked about our shipping industry, having to compete with other industries for these fuels. So that's a big question, but we'll come to that later. Now, Cargill has a cargo, but it is the shipping industry that needs to respond to these demands. We have the demand on a regulatory perspective of environmental sustainability and change. And of course, there's a great ambition from Brussels, which has made some important decisions recently with the adoption of rules bringing shipping into the European emissions trading scheme, as well as the approval by the European Council of the Fuel EU Maritime Directive. So I'll start with Europe, and I'll come to Φίλιππος. What has been the EXA position on the inclusion of shipping into the trading scheme? Do you think it will make ships avoid European ports? Will they find loopholes? What is your take on that?
Thank you, Désspοινα. I will start by saying climate crisis and decarbonization is not any longer a question of if or when. It's a question of how. And I think a better definition for the crisis, we are facing a planetary crisis. I think Paris Agreement with setting the 1.5 degree as a limit of the global warming, it was by that time a political target, but at this moment I think it's scientifically proven that is a physical limit. We have to keep the 1.5 degrees and even lower. So decarbonization and the crisis is a matter of how to do it and how fast we do it. Before I go to EXA position, as EXA, I have to state that we are aiming and we prefer a global solution. A global solution because the regional solutions like European Union regulations, a Fit for 55, I think they create a lot of loopholes. There may be a regulatory fragmentation by having other systems appearing in China, in UK, in US, and I think the ship owners, they may confront to situations where they have to pay double, or they will not agree on the systems the way every different model is calculating. But on top of that, it will add huge administrative expenses on the SME companies. And if we all consider that 80% of the European shipping are SMEs, you can imagine if we have to deal with 3 or 4 or 5 different systems, we need an in-house trading desk. And how many companies can they afford? I think this is a very big issue we have to face, and this is what we are trying to communicate with the regulators. Going now to the EXA position, EXA, I think, in general, the ship owners realized early enough that the discussion of inclusion shipping in EU ETS was something that we couldn't avoid. So we start thinking of how to do it more applicable and more easy to implement for the ship owners. And we set several targets at the beginning. First target was to convince the regulators to pass through the cost to the operators. And I think Jan is sitting here, and I give the credit to Cargill because Cargill was one of the first operators that supported the system by that time. Thank you for that. Now we need to see how we built in our charter parties the relevant clauses because it is an issue now. And then additional targets that were successful it was a earmarking of the revenues. And our idea was that we need all those money to utilize within our industry for research and development, for new technologies, alternative fuels, but also most importantly was the issue of bridging the gap between the fossil fuels and the alternative fuels. And I think these money are necessary to be utilized. We managed to get 20 million allowances, which is with today's price around 2 billion euro over the period of 24 or 25 when the money will come first into the fund, going through to 2030 are negligible. I believe that we need much more. And if you consider the derivative that is now out, the carbon contract for differences, that is the only one tool available to bridge the gap, you need a fortune. So the authorities didn't, or the regulators didn't understand clearly, and they, of course, have the excuse that there are too many other funds where maybe a ship owner for research and development or consortiums, they can apply for this money for this purpose. Our opinion is that we need to cover our fair share as shipping industry, and based on the money we pay, we need the biggest amount back for reinvestment in the shipping and enable then decarbonization as soon as possible. I think I cover everything. The only thing that I want to clarify is the fact that European Union is playing at this moment an international regulator, and this, despite the fact that they said no, this is not the case. I think if you go back in May 2014, where the integrated maritime policy has been agreed, one of the objectives was that European Union should play a significant role in international maritime affairs, and this is what they do now. Hopefully, this will not become the source where IMO will take over the regulations, and I think we are against an international EUTS, and we prefer a system that is more easy for implementation, but I will leave...
but the standard has been set in a way, right? So maybe that's something that will need to be considered in the future.
I think Dimitris will,
yes.
will
so,
elaborate a little bit more on that issue.
Dimitri, I'm coming to you, and I want a more general discussion on whether the shipping industry is making sufficient progress towards decarbonization. Do we have the necessary structures in place to achieve our objectives?
Déspοινα, thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers. Greek shipping especially is really, really committed to decarbonization. And Φίλιππος made an interesting and very valid point early on, saying that we need global regulation. Global regulation is for our global industry. It reduces distortions. It creates a much more effective field of play so that we can really work on our decarbonization. We do look to the IMO. we do look to the IMO for sustainable, for viable, for fit-for-purpose regulations. And we are also buyers of technology and of fuels. We do not create the technology or the fuels ourselves. If we had the correct fuels which were safe and available today, we would have been burning them from yesterday. So it's not that we don't have the willingness. We have an incredible amount of willingness, but there's only so much that the very disparate shipping industry can do. The shipping industry itself is a very wide term. We have liners, we have tramp, and those two models are incredibly different, but they serve society in the same efficient way. The models themselves bring efficiency. So we don't want to destroy the models just for the sake of decarbonization, because what we will gain in decarbonization, we will lose in efficiency. So this is what we're trying to do, is find this balance of efficiency and decarbonization. IMO has come up with 3 particular tools. The first tool is the design index, EEDI. And EEDI it's a unique tool. No other industry has it. It's a global efficiency standard, and ultimately it should be used to improve the efficiency of all vessels around the world. The second tool that has been developed for existing vessels is the EEXI, and the EEXI has started to come in this year, and we believe that EEXI will provide tangible decarbonization benefits. And finally, as an operational tool, is CII, and CII, the index itself is the subject of a lot of vibrant discussions, but nevertheless, CII will also bring about a reduction in carbon intensity. So we have 3 tangible tools from the IMO, and I think that we must give these tools some time. We have to be patient. We have to give these systems time, and these systems will themselves bring in technology, and these systems will themselves encourage the use of alternative fuels. So let's give it some time, and I think that we're on a very good track. However, there are 2 issues that we have to be very clear on. The first is that traditionally, shipping has improved efficiency as technologies have become available. If we take a very historical change of the steamships to the diesel vessels, shipping improves as a step function, not as a constant graph, as a constant curve. So we have to be mindful that as the technologies come along, shipping will embrace them very, very fast and will apply them as long as they are safe and cost effective. And finally, when I talk about safe, the new technologies and the new fuels must be safe. Safety must be fully incorporated into the regulatory process. Safety for the seafarers, safety for the vessels, and of course, safety for the fuels themselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. Building on comments I heard from all of you comes my next question. We see a number of shipping lines signing long-term offtake agreements with fuel suppliers, or even they're investing in clean fuel production. Is this a problem for the greater industry, given there may be a shortage of fuels? And in reality, that's not their major business activity anyway. So how do you see this? This goes to all of you, whoever wants to.
Jan.
I can start it. So we're actually a producer of advanced biofuels. So we've been that for a long time, and we will continue to be that. So I think it's kind of a necessity that somehow you have to go somehow more up and down these value chains, because they're getting so important. 80% of the investment in decarbonizing of shipping has to come from shore. So I think one way or the other, you cannot ignore that. We came to the point, and what we said earlier is we're all competing for the same solutions across industries, right? And I think that's a big concern to me. We're all basically competing for hydrogen-based fuels. We're competing with the steel industry. On advanced biofuels, we are competing with the airline industry. And in general, because all these fuels don't need to be ammonia or methanol, they need to be green, you're actually competing for renewable power. So I think that is where the big challenge is going to come from. And theoretically, you should probably prioritize certain industries, but the reality is there is no such a body that can prioritize globally which industry should be going or last. So I think what we should be doing within the industry, we should be a lot smarter and somehow prioritize some sectors over others. And you very quickly come to the conclusion, and I see this every day, that the closer you are to the end user, the easier it is actually to get somehow that premium paid. So it's very logical that you start with those industries, you start with green corridors, you really start breaking it down and prioritize some of these things, get the cost curve down, and then roll it out to the rest of the industry. So I think the fuel debate will continue, but I don't think we should be hiding behind it, and we should just get ahead of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan. Jan has made the very, very valid points. In our Greek shipping operates very largely in the tramp bulk sector, and that includes oil and gas, where vessels have no fixed itinerary. That makes it a huge challenge to find the alternative fuels. And I think that we're going to have a very strong collaboration with charterers in the future, because if we, for instance, select one kind of fuel, it could be that the charterer doesn't want this kind of fuel, and they're going to prefer a totally different type of alternative fuel. So I think that there has to be a lot of soul searching and collaboration, and really understanding again of the two basic shipping models. And we have to understand that the tramp bulk model, it encompasses a huge amount of a very large percentage of the world fleet. And it also is a very successful model in adapting to trades, to cargo supply and demand changes. And most important of all, it's very, very fast at reacting to geopolitical events. Yep. So we have to maintain that whilst finding a fuel or a combination of fuels which will allow us to decarbonize quickly. But I think that, as I said, we are going to be having much, much deeper and more collaborative discussions in the future.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you, Déspoina. First of all, I would like to say that we need a global fuel standard, which is not there yet. Yep. We saw that within the European Union, there is a sort of global standard or European standard, but again, there is a conflict between the different directives. For example, the Renewable Energy Directive accepts RFNBOs, the Fuel Maritime doesn't accept RFNBOs, and there is a conflict there. Somebody has to put that in an order, because we as ship owners, we would like to follow the direction that is given from the authorities. What is, for me, the new thing in the global fuel supply is that we will see a fragmented business. At this moment, it is controlled by a number of oil majors and refineries, and I think in the future, this supply of fuels will be much more fragmented. Everybody can produce ammonia or can produce methanol, etc., etc. So this is something that we have to take into consideration when we decide which fuel we will use. On another subject, I believe we are expecting now the finalization of the life cycle analysis of the fuels, and this will be critical to understand which fuels have future, which may be considered as RFMBOs, and these are the fuels that may be used by the global industry. And on top of that, what is for me very important is to create the necessary infrastructure for the fueling of the vessels, the handling of the fuel on board, and the transportation of the fuel from the area of, let's say, from the well, like it is now described, to the tank. There are too many things to be done. There are too many regulations that they are capturing from different angles, and this is why we need a global regulation on the level of IMO.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah, just want to compliment what Philip says, because I think he's right. And a while back we started the Sea Cargo Charter under the GMF, and actually one of the goals was to somehow at least agree on how you actually measure emissions, because if you ask 5 people, you got 5 different answers. So I think that was the first step, somehow trying to get into that direction. I do agree it's very unclear on the regulations on what counts, what doesn't count, and you don't know what counts today if it counts tomorrow, because that's the other problem, which makes it quite difficult to invest. But what I find very interesting in the industry is that this is an industry that has always been looking at regulation as the only thing that you should comply with. And what we're seeing more and more is the end user that is starting to put demands on the shipping industry, which might actually be different or over and above what the regulator is. And especially on decarbonization, that is very complicated, because most of the commitments that the end user have made are voluntary commitments, which might have all kind of different definitions, actually. What might be green for one might be not so green for somebody else. And I think we're just setting up ourselves for a very complex world going forward here.
Since you mentioned the Sea Cargo Charter, I did have a question about it. How can it make a difference? Of course, we all know shipping is extremely competitive. If one ship owner has a clean ship but requires a higher charter rate to break even, there will always be another owner with a less clean ship or a more polluting ship with a lower rate. So how do you ensure that the Sea Cargo Charter does not get accused of being greenwashing?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good question, a valid question. When we started the Sea Cargo Charter, we really wanted to make sure that we created a transparency around emissions, because I think we have a track record of not being the most transparent industry. So I think it was important for us to do that. It was around what I said earlier on the standardizing, and it was also somehow making sure that we knew that versus the academic models on getting to this 1.5 degree, how we're actually doing as a shipping industry, but also as an individual company. And I fully agree with what Δημήτριος said earlier. This is not a straight line. This comes in chunks because new technology comes in. But it's good to know where you are. How far misaligned are we? Because if we're getting very far misaligned, maybe we need to do something additional. So that was what was meant with that. It's never been meant to be a league table. And I've been very, very vocal about that, because every business is different. Every ship type is different. Every trade flow is different. So you cannot compare apples to apples. What has it done in the last 3 years, and I think that's been the success of the Sea Cargo Charter, it has helped the collaboration, I think, because now the information is flowing through the industry, and that was something that we really worried about if that would happen, and it's actually happening, which I think is a huge kudos to the owning society that they actually were willing to contribute to this. I think what it's also done, it's learned a lot of people how their business actually worked. I think a lot of people didn't even realize where the emissions were coming from, and now people start looking at this and say, well, I can do certain things different. Coming to your last part, I think in the end of the day, we are a commercial business, and we can only decarbonize this industry if we can do that also in a financial sustainable way. If this becomes charity, then if the pockets are going to be empty, the charity will stop and the decarbonization will stop. So what this has done, it has actually made decarbonization a point in commercial decision making. Not the only point, but a point. And I think that's been a huge plus. So the greenwashing, I think as long as we're transparent, we can clearly say what it is and what it's not, I think we're okay with that.
Thank you. Dimitri, how can companies in the shipping industry balance the costs of investing in sustainability with the need to remain competitive in the market?
Yeah, thank you, Despina. And it really is a follow-on from Jan's answer, which was decarbonization is incredibly important, but the vessel has to be able to survive financially and economically at the end of the day. So at the moment, the future regulations and the current regulations are making shipping companies focus very, very closely on the technologies which are available to improve efficiency mainly, and also to reduce power consumption on board as much as is technically and economically feasible. A lot of companies, whether they are in the private or in the public sector, have looked at these and installed these technologies. In many cases, I would say that the return on investment on these technologies, unfortunately, is very low. And at this moment in time, the investments are being made, dare I say it, and I think it's well worth it for strong PR. But when it comes down to real essence of real reductions in fuel consumption and thereby emissions, I think we are being very, very challenged. What we can look forward to is we need collaboration with the shipyards, with the engine suppliers, with the charterers, in order to produce the technologies that are needed so that we can make significant improvements in efficiency. And at this moment in time, again, I go back to the tram bulk sector, where it is not very easy to go to a shipyard, even though you know what is the most economical and what is the most energy efficient design. Many of the yards will not provide this. Philippos is an expert in this because he's found a yard where they'll do exactly what he says. But that, I have to say, is almost unique. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Philippi, I'm going back a little bit to regulation, and the FuelEU Maritime Directive will make ships use clean fuels when it's in force, and I presume this is going to be a challenge. Where will the fuel come from, and what can they be?
Difficult question I will try to answer. Before I go there, to what Dimitris said, the carbon contract for differences that is now under development has two legs. The first leg is the fuel. Practically, you hedge or you balance the difference between the fossil fuel and the alternative fuels. And the second is the total cost. The total cost means from time that I will invest on a new ship, I can possibly retrieve the difference on that investment from these carbon contracts for differences. But you see, it is a way to reach that level. At this moment, only the fuel contracts are going to be available in the market. Now I'm going to, by the way, this is a tool that you have to utilize, not the owners. Mm-hmm. Because if I deliver to you a ship burning alternative fuels, you have to take the advantage of this, yes, of this derivative, and maybe you have to pay us a little more higher charter rate in order to cover our capex.
That makes sense.
I think this is okay. You are committed now.
Yeah, see,
going now to the FuelEU Maritime. I think, although the paper is not yet published, we are awaiting the final paper within the next couple of days. I think from the information I have, EU missed the point, missed the opportunity to incentivize the uptake of alternative fuels. So from the very beginning, there were three major objectives for the Fuel EU Maritime. The first objective was to gradually reduce the carbon intensity of the fuels. And this is the reason they said 2% as from 25 and going to 80%, I think 2050, with an escalation of every 5 years. Not a linear escalation, but there is escalation of every 5 years. This is the first target. The second target is to incentivize the uptake of the alternative fuels, and in particular within Fuel EU Maritime, the RFMBOs. And the third, it was the usage of OPS, which is valid only for the container ships and the cruise or passenger ships. So as far as I know, the shared responsibility, which was the demand or one of the main priorities of EXA, shared responsibility of the fuel suppliers, has not been achieved. And what that means, you have the implementation of the Fuel EU Maritime, you have it 100% of intra-European trade, 100% of any port being at berth, because this is the reason of the OPS and the initial utilization from containers and cruise vessels or passenger vessels, and 50% from all international in and out trips. And there is also a leakage area where 300 miles from European borders, you cannot transship cargo and try to bypass the regulation. But assuming that you are bunkering somewhere in Asia, and you have some certificates that the fuel you have on board is RFMBOs, who can verify the certificate? How can European Union accept the certificate of a fuel, even if it's a simple biofuel, which if it's an advanced biofuel, you don't get the multiplier effect for your emission reductions. And if it's an RFMBO, you get it. So it creates, practically with this decision they made, an enforcement loophole or an enforcement minefield. That means very difficult to enforce it. This create for the shipowning industry a very big issue. Of course, there is another thing that there are no clear guidances in the regulation. How to be implemented? What are the responsibilities of the ship owner? Are these responsibilities aligned with the charterers? Because practically, it's the charterer who buys the fuel. It's exactly like the same issue with EU ETS, where the transfer of this cost goes to the charterer because the charterer buys the fuel, decides the speed, decides the cargo, decides the routes, etc., etc. So there are too many issues. Going now to your questions, will be available fuels in the market? There are some good news there. And the first thing for me is the Hydrogen Energy Directive, where it describes the intention of the European Union to increase the productivity of hydrogen, the green hydrogen. At this moment, I think I have some numbers. They produce green hydrogen based on 160 megawatt alternative energy, and their intention is to increase this to 6,000 megawatt by 2025. It's a substantial improvement on the alternative energy. And then hydrogen will be used as energy carrier, not any longer as energy source. That means not as a fuel, but as energy carrier. Out of the hydrogen, you can produce with CO2 carbon capture, methanol, which is clean, and it is considered as RFMBO. And with partial distillation of the air, you get the nitrogen, and you can produce, again, RFMBO, clean ammonia. So if the intention is really to increase the production of clean hydrogen, I think the availability will be there. But it requires a lot of investments,
Thank you, Felipe. And we have only a few minutes. You all touched upon collaboration in your comments. We have talked about how shipping needs to change to achieve our goals. How will collaboration make a difference? And I mean collaboration not only between ship owners and the cargo owners, but also the technology providers and all the other service providers we have in the industry. This is a question to all of you.
I can start. First of all, I want to recognize, and I've said this before, when we were quite early on the decarbonization train in our company, and when I was talking decarbonization 6-7 years ago, I got a lot of people looking at me and telling me that it was never going to happen in shipping. And now we find ourselves in 2023, and even here in Greece, I would say this is a top priority now. So I think the industry's come a long way, and I think what Philippos said, it's not anymore should we, it's about how we're going to do it. So I think that narrative has changed completely, and I think that's a fantastic step forward. And the collaboration piece, I think, is just impossible to not change, because how are you going to write charter parties in what we just heard on regulation that, by the way, will change 10 times before we will get there, because that has happened and that will happen. It's impossible to do that. So you have to collaborate. So you have to build trust. You have to de-risk things. We're not expecting an owner to put all the risk for the new technology without anybody underwriting at least part of that. So all these things are coming together that you have to collaborate. I also think, in coming back to my role in the Global Maritime Forum, where we're actually trying to get all these people from the different parts of the industry and a wider part, even the fuel suppliers and the builders together, to somehow create a little bit of a coalition of the willing and the first movers. I think it's going to be key in that as well. So collaboration for me is key. I see it happening, and I think it's just going to intensify from here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what Jan said, I have to reiterate, collaboration is key. One thing which we do ask of the technology providers and of the is that they don't think only about their IP, but they are willing to share their findings for the common good. Thank you.
I think I fully agree with both of you. What is important for me as a ship owner is that there are regulations already in place, and we have to find a way to make the agreements between the partners, the stakeholders. I think a ship owner has to agree with the operator, but not independently. What is going on right now, for example, the CII clause, there are maybe 15 different versions of clauses, depending on who you are, how big you are, and how you want to take that responsibility. This, for me, is unacceptable. SPIPCO there has issued one clause, and this clause has to be agreed, of course, refined, but everybody should discuss around that clause and find a unified form. Always there will be deviations here and there, but instead of having 50 different clauses, this for me not a collaboration. In fact, now we need it more than before. Collaboration of all the stakeholders.
Thank you. Thank you, Felipe, Dimitri, and Jan. I think in 14 minutes, we managed to not only address the challenges of reducing the carbon footprint of shipping, but also explore the potential of emerging technologies and also highlight the importance of collaboration between all industry stakeholders. Thank you so much. And thank you to our audience.